What if your mind wasn't just a brain, but a blueprint? What if your thoughts didn't just flow, they formed? What if inside every idea you carry is a structure waiting to rise? And what if Albert Einstein didn't just think, he built? And he didn't just build ideas, he built dimensions, cathedrals of consciousness that reach through the sky of science into the stars of spirit. And what made him different was not just his genius, but his geometry. Because Einstein's genius had symmetry, rhythm, order, a sacred shape that made the universe respond. And you have that same power, too. But first, you have to unlock the door. And that door is hidden inside your own mind. A place most people never enter because they're too busy reacting to the outside noise to ever design their inner sanctuary. But Einstein designed it. And he designed it with silence and symbols and surrender. And he knew that every great thought begins not with noise, but with stillness. And in that stillness, space is born. And space is where structure can rise. And Einstein created space inside himself, not by meditating on emptiness, but by meditating on meaning. And every time he closed his eyes, he wasn't escaping the world, he was redrawing it. And you must learn to do the same, because you weren't born to consume reality. You were born to construct it. You weren't built to survive within a system. You were built to generate systems from the sparks of your own awareness. And Einstein didn't memorize laws, he met them. He didn't force ideas, he formed alignment. And alignment is sacred. It's when your inner grid clicks into place, and suddenly the energy flows, the insight rises, and time begins to bend. And Einstein's greatest breakthroughs didn't come from stress. They came from surrender, from the moment he let go of needing the answer and became the question. And when you become the question, the answer finds you. Because the universe is magnetic, and your thoughts are magnets. And Einstein's thoughts were shaped like spirals, not boxes, like expanding domes, not prisons. And most people live in boxes of belief that were never built by them. And those boxes block the field of flow. And the field of flow is where geometry becomes destiny. And Einstein lived in that field, walked it, mapped it, and made it his. Language, and he would see images, not just ideas. He would feel form before formula. He would sense design before detail. And that design wasn't random, it was divine. And the divine speaks in geometry. And when you start seeing patterns in chaos, you're beginning to wake up. And when you start recognizing that even your failures have symmetry, you're beginning to step into mastery. And Einstein saw beauty in the breakdown because he saw structure in collapse, and even time itself to him was not linear. It was curved, a spiral, a helix, but deeper intelligence guiding everything. And you can feel that guidance too, but you have to unlearn what you were taught about thinking. You were not taught to think, you were taught to repeat. You were not shown how to build, only how to behave. And Einstein broke that behavior by trusting what he saw within. And what he saw were not just numbers, but sacred shapes, energy loops, golden ratios, timelines folding. And the moment you stop chasing answers and start constructing presence, you will begin to access this sacred geometry too. Because geometry is the language of the soul. And your soul is tired of being square. It wants to spiral. It wants to flow. And Einstein let it flow through him like water. And that water carved truth through the mountains of limitation and built rivers into the future. And if your thoughts feel stuck, Maybe it's because you're not designing them. You're just digesting old patterns. And sacred thought must be shaped, not swallowed. Einstein shaped his thoughts with silence and stretched them with space and tested them with truth. And through that, he built something unbreakable. Not a theory, but a temple. And every time he returned to that temple, he heard new wisdom. And every time he obeyed that wisdom, he bent the known laws of existence. And this is not a miracle, it's math, but a higher math, a divine logic, the logic of alignment. And once you build that alignment, your life becomes a work of art, not just productivity, but prophecy. And Einstein was not a prophet with robes. He was a prophet with reason, with rhythm, with reverence, and you have that too. You just buried it under noise, and now it's time to rebuild the cathedral of your consciousness, with clarity as your compass, with courage as your cornerstone, and with curiosity as your compass. Code, and when you build from that place, your thoughts become temples, your words become waves, your beliefs become bridges, and your life becomes a living equation, not of perfection, but of presence, not of facts, but of flow, not of systems, but of sacred symmetry. Go get it. What if your mind was an unfinished temple, and every belief, every idea, every dream was a beam, a pillar, a ceiling? What if Albert Einstein didn't just think like a scientist, but built like an architect of awareness, shaping blueprints from curiosity, carving columns out of questions, and designing windows into the future, using the light of imagination as his only guide? And what if you've been trying to achieve before you've built, trying to succeed before you've structured, trying to change reality before creating inner architecture? Because Einstein's mind was a sacred construction site, a never-ending spiral staircase reaching into truth. And he didn't fill it with noise, he filled it with shape, silence, and sacred symmetry, because he knew ideas are not just words. They are walls or doors. They either trap you or free you. And he didn't just ask questions. He walked through them like portals, like corridors in the temple of possibility. And you must do the same. Because your breakthroughs don't come from thinking harder. They come from framing better. Framing the chaos into clarity. Framing the fear into frequency. Framing your doubt into design. And Einstein's real discovery was that the universe is made of curves and not corners. And yet the system teaches you to think in straight lines, fixed logic, trapped patterns. But your soul was designed in spirals, and spirals are sacred. And sacred is not religious, it's real. It's the part of you that cannot be copied, cannot be measured, cannot be explained, but only embodied. And Einstein embodied this sacred intelligence, and most people mistake intelligence for memory. But true intelligence is geometry. It's how you shape awareness, how you structure thought, how you design emotion to create direction. And Einstein didn't control thought, he crafted it. And crafting thought means you treat it like art, not reaction. And every thought he followed was shaped by intention. And intention is the tool of the sacred builder. And most people live in mental shacks built by fear and held together by repetition. But Einstein built a palace of possibility, and he lived in it daily. And that palace was built on unseen principles like intuition, imagination, stillness, surrender. And what if you could rebuild your inner world, starting today, using Einstein's tools, not the tools of others' industry, but the tools of infinity? And the first tool is space, because nothing can be shaped in a crowded mind, and space must be created with silence. And silence is not absence, it's alignment. And in silence, the true shapes rise. And Einstein would walk in silence, sit in silence, and ask the silence to show him what thinking could not. And the second tool is sight, not external sight, but inner vision. Because vision is the light that reveals the sacred structure. And Einstein saw not just with eyes, but with essence. He felt the curves of truth. He sensed the flow of reality. And the third tool is surrender. Because the mind cannot force the sacred, it can only receive it. And he surrendered not by giving up, but by giving in to the shape of truth. And that truth shaped him. And in being shaped, he became a shaper. And your life is waiting for the same thing. Not for you to dominate, but to design. Not to force, but to flow. Not to collapse, but to construct. And every time you sit in stillness and open to the unseen, your mind begins to rewire, and your thoughts begin to reorganize, and the sacred geometry begins to emerge, not as a theory, but as a lived experience. And you are no longer a thinker, you are a builder. And the life you build begins to look like a masterpiece of rhythm and alignment. And Einstein's wife became that because he built it from inside out, and the outside was just a reflection of inner symmetry. And you are building something, whether you know it or not. The question is, are you building it with fear or form? With noise or knowing? With imitation or insight? Einstein didn't copy genius. He constructed his own. He didn't chase purpose. He shaped it. And he shaped it with sacred attention. And sacred attention is the rarest form of power, because it turns the invisible into the indestructible. And that's what he did. He made truth indestructible by giving it structure. And structure is what turns spirit into strategy and thought into force. And now it's your time to work. Shape your inner cathedral to clear the dust of distraction and place every thought like a stone. And with every stone, declare, I am building something eternal. I am shaping what cannot be shaken. I am becoming the temple that contains the next revolution of mind. Go get it. What if your greatest power isn't what you think, but how you think? What if your mind is not a container, but a compass? Not a library, but a landscape, waiting to be designed, waiting to be navigated, not by memory, but by meaning. And Albert Einstein didn't just store knowledge, he sculpted reality. From the unseen, and most people get trapped in information, but Einstein moved in imagination. And imagination is not childish, it is cosmic architecture. And he used it to draw the unseen, the infinite, the divine, into frames of understanding. And those frames became formulas. And those formulas became forces that rewrote the world. And it wasn't luck, it was alignment. It wasn't coincidence, it was code. And that code was sacred because it followed patterns beyond logic and shapes beyond systems. And those shapes live in you too. And they are not awakened by facts, but by focus. And Einstein focused differently, not on what to think, but where thought comes from. And when you trace thought to its origin, you no longer think inside of it, you think from it. And Einstein thought from the source, from the silence, from the structure behind the surface. And that structure is geometry. And geometry is not just a math, it is the map of consciousness. And most people live off course because they've never been taught the shape of their own soul. But Einstein studied that shape every day, and he understood that clarity is not something you find, it's something you form. And form requires stillness, because the sacred will not speak into chaos, It only echoes in order. And order begins with attention. And attention is sacred when it's undivided. And Einstein gave his attention fully to ideas, and they gave themselves fully to him. And that's the exchange most people never experience, because they give attention to noise and receive confusion in return. But sacred thinkers give attention to stillness and receive architecture in return. And Einstein built his mind like a cathedral, where thought was not noise, but note, and every idea was a sound in a song, and every equation was a chord in a larger harmony. And harmony is not perfection, it's precision, and precision means you're aligned with something real. And Einstein aligned not with ego, but with energy. And energy speaks in shapes, in spirals, in light. And he saw light not as a thing, but as a language. And he listened to it with his soul and let it shape his reality. And that's why his vision bent the laws of time, not because he broke them, but because he followed a higher symmetry. And you can too, if you stop rushing and start reforming. Because reforming the mind means breaking the old scaffolding of fear and replacing it with sacred design. And sacred design is not about what's popular, it's about what's permanent. And Einstein built permanence into every thought, not to be remembered, but to be repeated by reality itself. And when reality repeats your thought, you've entered the field of creation. And that field is not somewhere far away. It's in you now, waiting for order to rise. And you must give it form, give it language, give it focus. And Einstein's focus was sacred, because he knew that the thinker must disappear for truth to arrive. And when he disappeared into the silence, into the symmetry, into the song of the unseen, something else emerged, the field, the form, the force, and that force moved through him like electricity through a divine wire. And it rewired the world, and it can rewire yours too. But first, you must break the habit of random thought and build the ritual of sacred structure. You must sit with your chaos and shape it into clarity. You must treat your thoughts not as distractions, but as divine materials. And every belief you carry must be examined, not with judgment, but with geometry. Does this belief shape expansion or limitation? Does this pattern build walls or windows? And Einstein turned every wall into the doorway, because he saw space where others saw structure, and structure where others saw space. And that paradox is where power lives. And you don't need more information, you need more formation. And formation is the conscious shaping of consciousness. And it begins with one question: what is the shape of my thinking? And does it match the destiny I claim? And if not, reshape it, rewire it, reforge it into something sacred. Because your mind is not broken, it's unbuilt. And Einstein proved what a built mind can do. And now it's your turn to take the raw materials of thought and make them sing, make them shine, make them sacred. Go get it. What if thought was not a reaction, but a ritual? What if every idea you've ever had was a building block, and you've been stacking them randomly, instead of architecting them intentionally? And what if Albert Einstein didn't just think differently, but design differently? Because he didn't treat thought as information, he treated it as infrastructure. And while others collected answers, he carved arches, he built bridges between seen and unseen, and he walked those bridges into the impossible. Because his mind wasn't chaotic. It was calculated, not with control, but with clarity. Because control limits and clarity liberates. And Einstein chose liberation. And most people live inside mental cages built by repetition, habits made of hesitation, belief systems shaped by fear. But Einstein escaped those cages because he understood that geometry isn't something you see outside. It's something you activate inside. And the moment you activate it, your mind becomes a blueprint, and your life becomes a build site. And Einstein was always building, not for applause, but for alignment. Not to impress, but to express the sacred design flowing through him. And that design has been flowing through you too. The difference is, he listened. While most people leak, they leak energy, leak attention, leak intention, because they've never learned the structure of focus. But Einstein built that structure, and he lived inside it. And you must build it too, because your destiny depends on your mental architecture. And if your foundation is random, your future will be unstable. But if your foundation is sacred, every dream becomes possible. And sacred doesn't mean complicated, it means clean. Clean energy, clean thought, clean design. Because when you remove the clutter, you reveal the code. And the code is ancient, and it's alive, and it's been waiting for you to open it. And Einstein opened it, not with force, but with frequency. And he tuned himself to the vibration of truth, not opinion, not pressure, not performance, but truth. And truth is always symmetrical, because it reflects back what you put in. And when Einstein gave full attention, he received full revelation. And most people want full results with half attention. But the sacred doesn't work like that. It waits for full commitment and full presence. And Einstein gave both. And that's why the universe gave him access. And you have that access too, if you stop living by accident and start creating by design. Because everything you feel is forming something, and everything you think is shaping something. And if you could see the temple you're building with your thoughts, you'd never allow a single negative belief to become part of your walls. And Einstein didn't. He didn't allow fear to become structure. He used fear as signal to find better alignment. And when he found it, he built with it. And that's how he created things that never existed. Because he didn't ask what's already been done. He asked what wants to become. And when you ask that question, the sacred answers, not always with logic, but always with layout. And layout is the invisible symmetry that guides creation. And Einstein followed it in dreams, in music, in walking alone in silence. And those were not breaks, they were blueprints. And most people skip the silence and wonder why their buildings collapse. Because silence is how the structure reveals itself. And Einstein waited long enough to hear it. And once he heard it, he honored it, and turned it into thought, and turned thought into theory, and turned theory into timelessness. And now it's your turn, not to memorize Einstein, but to mirror him. Not to recite, but to restructure. Because your life is a sacred design in progress. And every moment you choose presence, you place another stone in your temple. And every moment you align your thought with your truth, the light shines through the windows of your being and illuminates your path. Not with speed, but with shape. Not with hype, but with harmony. And harmony is the harmony of things. Highest frequency, and Einstein reached it not because he chased it, but because he became it. And becoming is your birthright, not just to exist, but to express the divine through the design of your mind and your life, and your voice and your vision. And Einstein didn't just leave theories, he left templates. And those templates are for you to build with. not to worship, but to activate. Because genius isn't inherited, it's engineered. And the most sacred thing you will ever do is engineer your own awakening. Go get it. What if you were never meant to follow logic, but to form it? What if rules were not limits, but scaffolding for your own elevation? And what if Albert Einstein didn't just solve problems, he sculpted dimensions? Because for him, thought was not linear, it was layered, not narrow, but nested in patterns and mirrors and meanings. And the greatest formula he ever uncovered was not E equals MC squared. It was the formula of awareness plus alignment equals activation. And this formula lives in you too. But most people never activate because never align, and they never align because they never pause long enough to realize they are already building something with every second, with every word, with every decision. But the blueprint is unconscious, and unconscious construction creates confusion. And Einstein refused confusion, not by resisting it, but by reshaping it into clarity. And clarity is not found, it is forged through sacred repetition, through conscious design, through listening to the silence that surrounds the structure. And Einstein knew that silence speaks, but only to the architect, not the imitator, and he never imitated anyone. He became the channel, the echo, the pattern maker, and the pattern breaker. And you must become both, because to evolve is to dissolve what no longer aligns. And to dissolve means you must first see. And Einstein had vision, not just in his eyes, but in his mind. And that vision allowed him to shape ideas in 3 dimensions, to bend time like clay, to turn paradox into poetry, and science into song. And your life can do the same when you shift from forcing results to forming rhythm, because rhythm is reality's hidden language. And Einstein moved in rhythm, the rhythm of thought, the rhythm of silence, the rhythm of cosmic questions. And most people want answers, but answers are echoes. Rhythm is origin, and when you tap into rhythm, you become a designer, not just a thinker. And Einstein designed the invisible into the visible by building bridges between dimensions, between intuition and intellect, between spirit and intellect. Science and you are a bridge too, when you choose to be, not when you memorize, but when you mystify, when you allow wonder to rise. And when wonder rises, you are no longer bound by tradition. You are elevated by transformation, and transformation is a shape. It is a shift in structure, and your thoughts shape you every single day. And most people are shaped by external noise. But Einstein shaped himself from the inside out, and he did it by mastering one skill most people ignore: internal symmetry. Because when your thoughts are symmetrical, your soul can speak. And when your soul speaks, you remember who you were before the programming, before the patterning, before the pretending. And Einstein didn't pretend. He pursued the real, the raw, the rhythm. And the realness became recognition, and recognition became revelation. And revelation became rhythm again. And the cycle never ended, and it never ends for you either. Once you begin, and to begin, you must step back from your timeline and look at the geometry of your days. Are they shaped by intention or by interruption? Are you building a sacred sequence or a scattered story? And Einstein built a sacred sequence of days, filled with solitude and sparks, with silence and systems, with staring at the stars and letting space shape the mind, because space is a builder's first gift. And most people fill space with distractions, but Einstein filled it with design. And that's why his mind echoed eternity, not because he was special, but because he was structured. And structure is sacred when it's aligned. And alignment means every part of you agrees with your becoming. And most people are in conflict, not because they are broken, but because their thoughts are built in separate directions. And Einstein unified his thought and became unstoppable, not because of power, but because of peace. And peace is power when it is precision. And precision is the point where design meets destiny. And destiny is not a prize, it is a pattern, and that pattern is already forming in you right now. The only question is, will you shape it with sacred attention or allow it to shape you without direction? Because one leads to alignment and one leads to exhaustion. And Einstein chose alignment every single time. And you must too. Because the next level of your life is not behind a locked door. It's behind an unlocked mind. And your mind unlocks the moment you treat thought as sacred structure and not passing stimulus. And when you do that, everything shifts, because you are no longer a person trying to succeed. You are a temple under construction, and your destiny is being carved in real time. Go get it. What if the only reason the world hasn't shifted is because your thoughts haven't aligned? What if the missing piece isn't effort, but architecture? What if your life is not a product of your power, but of your pattern? And Albert Einstein didn't just use the mind, he mapped it. He didn't just wonder about reality, he wove it, thread by thread, with the golden string of sacred structure. And he knew that most people fail not from lack of ability, but from building on broken blueprints. And you don't need more motivation. You need mental geometry, a structure for your storm, a pattern for your power, a shape for your spirit. And Einstein lived in shapes, circles, spirals, patterns, and pulses. He wasn't chasing answers, he was following alignments. And alignment means everything you are moves in one direction, like light through a lens, like sound through a tunnel, like intention through time. And when Einstein aligned, he didn't become smarter, he became clearer. And clarity is where creation lives. And you can feel it when it arrives, because the noise disappears and the knowing begins. And most people live in noise and wonder why they can't build anything that lasts. But you must become a sculptor of silence. And Einstein did that. By turning inward, not to escape, but to excavate. And every time he dug deep into the caverns of his own consciousness, he found new codes. And those codes weren't written in language. They were written in symmetry, in rhythm, in sacred space. And you carry the same potential, but you must stop thinking like a machine and start designing like a mystic. Because machines follow inputs, but mystics follow imprints. And the universe has left imprints on your soul in the shape of curiosity, in the shape of obsession, in the shape of dreams too persistent to forget. And Einstein followed those shapes until they turned into structure, and that structure became timeless. And timelessness is the gift of those who shape reality, not with force, but with frequency. And frequency is not something you find, it is something you form. And your thoughts are tuning forks. And every time you think, you vibrate. And every vibration builds something. And the question is, are you building chaos or cathedral? Are you constructing limitation or liberation? Because the choice is yours. And Einstein chose liberation through alignment. And alignment is not ease. It is elegance. It is the design of discipline that leads to divine discovery. And most people wait for breakthrough. But Einstein built breakthrough because breakthrough is a product of pressure applied to precision. And he applied that pressure daily with patience and presence. And now the world calls him genius. But genius is not magic. It is maintenance of mental mastery. And you become a master not by memorizing, but by molding. And he molded his mind into a vessel for vision, and that vision was sacred, not because it was perfect, but because it was pure. And purity is the result of clarity through cleansing. And cleansing happens when you remove the thoughts that do not match the shape of your becoming. And Einstein removed what didn't resonate and amplified what did. And that's why his legacy resonates today, because it was not built for applause. It was built with alignment. And you must do the same. You must stop chasing approval and start constructing alignment, because aligned thought is indestructible, and Einstein didn't take it. Protect his thoughts with walls. He protected them with width, with space to expand, with time to transform. And when others rushed to conclusions, he walked the spiral inward until truth met him. And that spiral was not random. It was divine geometry. And your life follows the same sacred spiral. When you trust the shape of your soul more than the sound of the crowd, because the crowd wants you to think fast and flat, but the sacred wants you to think deep and dimensional. And Einstein chose dimension every time. And that dimension birthed depth, and depth birthed design, and design birthed destiny. And destiny is not an accident. It is an alignment of shapes that were once invisible and are now incarnated, because you stayed long enough in the silence to form them. And the world will tell you to speed up, but speed without structure is destruction. And Einstein moved slowly enough to become timeless. And you must move slowly enough to become sacred, because sacred is not something you find. It is something you shape. And that shape begins now, when you stop chasing shortcuts and start constructing the staircase, one sacred step at a time. Go get it. What if your thoughts were not random, but rituals? What if every idea carried an energy signature, and that signature was shaping your reality, whether you knew it or not? And what if Albert Einstein's brilliance didn't come from a higher IQ, but from a deeper design? Because Einstein didn't just think in facts, he moved in frequencies. And he didn't just speak in sentences, he sculpted with silence. And the world saw formulas, but he saw formations. Formations of light, of truth, of cosmic architecture, shaped into symbols that mirrored reality. And most people try to organize their life without ever organizing their mind. And then they wonder why things fall apart. But Einstein understood that life reflects the structure of your thoughts, and he built his thinking like a cathedral, with principles like pillars and imagination like stained glass. And when he walked through his thoughts, he didn't just remember, he resonated. And resonance is sacred. It is the echo of alignment, the sound of thought vibrating at the same level as creation. And most people think thoughts are invisible, but they are structures forming in silence. And you are either building with your thoughts, or you are being built by someone else's. And Einstein refused to live in second-hand architecture. He drew his own maps. And those maps were not static. They were spiraling, always ascending, always bending, always returning to the center. Because he didn't build a castle, He built a compass, and his mind always pointed inward, not to retreat, but to recalibrate. And recalibration is what most people miss, because they live in reaction, not reflection. And reaction is random, but reflection is sacred. And Einstein reflected daily, not just on what he thought, but on why. And that why gave shape to his how. And that how became a flow. And flow is not magic, it's mathematics. The mathematics of energy and attention aligned into direction. And you must align too. Not later, not someday, but now. Because you are building every moment of your life, even in your silence, even in your distraction, even in your delay. You are still building. And the question is, what are you constructing? And does it match the vision you carry or the fear you haven't released? And Einstein released fear by seeing through it. And seeing through fear is only possible when you stand on a structure of truth. And that structure must be self-made, not self-inherited. Because truth cannot be inherited, only embodied. And Einstein embodied his truths by designing his mind to receive them. And that design is your destiny too. If you stop copying the world and start composing your world. And to compose, you must hear the harmony beneath the noise. And that harmony is sacred geometry, the rhythm of the cosmos, coded in your consciousness. And Einstein was fluent in that rhythm, not because he studied harder, but because he listened deeper. And deep listening unlocks the invisible laws. And those laws are not made by governments or systems. They are made by symmetry. And you are here to build with symmetry, to take the chaos of your past and shape it into coherence, to take the fragments of your pain and shape them into precision. And Einstein did that, not in a lab, but in a loop of curiosity, stillness, surrender, and then structure. And once structure arrived, everything aligned, and alignment became insight, and insight became impact. And the world calls that genius, but it's not genius. It's geometry. And that geometry is in you now, waiting to be drawn, waiting to be activated, waiting to be obeyed. Because the sacred does not scream, it waits. And when you silence the outer world, the inner voice begins to build again. And that voice will not just speak, it will shape. And that shape will become your direction. And that direction will reveal your destiny, not because you chased it, but because you built it. Einstein didn't chase success, he shaped reality and the world, bent around his vision, because his vision was structured in sacred space, and your vision is waiting for the same. Your clarity is not lost. It is buried beneath broken patterns. And when you break those patterns with sacred structure, everything flows, not by force, but by formation. And you become the architect, not just of ideas, but of infinity. Go get it. What if you could feel the future before it happens? Not as a guess, but as a geometry. What if every decision you make bends space in one direction or another? Not because you're lucky or cursed, but because you're aligned or fragmented. And Albert Einstein knew this, not because he read it, but because he felt it. He could feel when thoughts were out of tune, when the structure didn't match the signal, when the energy was scattered. And most people never feel that, because they were never taught to measure life by alignment. They were only taught to chase outcomes. But Einstein wasn't chasing anything. He was constructing everything. And the difference between chasing and constructing is the difference between exhaustion and elevation. And Einstein chose elevation, and that elevation came from how he thought, not what he thought. And his thinking was never static. It was sacred motion, spiraling upward, inward, backward, and forward. And every loop he made brought him deeper into clarity, because the mind, when shaped, becomes a mirror. And Einstein shaped his mind like a spiral mirror that didn't just reflect, it revealed. And what it revealed was the secret shape of reality, a shape that lives in you too, but can only be activated when thought becomes intentional, and intention becomes internal, and the internal becomes the architect. And Einstein lived from the internal, and most people live from the external. But the external is just echo. The real structure is always within. And he knew that when the inner design is right, the outer design will rise. And your life is not about adding more. It's about aligning more, about building better, not faster. And most people want results without architecture, want brilliance without blueprint, want wisdom without waiting. And Einstein waited. He wandered. He wondered. And in that sacred stillness, the sacred symmetry emerged. And when it did, he did not rush it. He respected it and built around it. And this is where most people fail. They get the download, but forget to build the doorway. They feel the truth, but forget to lay the foundation. And Einstein didn't just feel, he forged. He shaped those sacred feelings into sacred forms, and those forms became theories. But before they were science, they were silence. And he never skipped that phase, because he knew silence is where the shapes of thought are drawn. And if you skip silence, you build noise, and noise builds confusion. But sacred silence builds cathedrals, cathedrals of consciousness, where every corner, every curve, every reflection is intentional and filled with purpose. And Einstein built those cathedrals, not with stone, but with stillness. And the same stillness lives in you, but you must trust it, not fear it. Because stillness is where you meet the source, and the source is never chaotic. The source is geometry, and geometry is the fingerprint of God. And Einstein didn't worship science. He decoded the sacred, and the sacred was always speaking in rhythm, in shape, in energy. And when he listened long enough, he began to echo it, and that echo became impact. And now it's your turn, not to repeat him, but to reconstruct yourself from the ground up, from the foundation in, from the blueprint buried beneath your fears. Because you are already the architect. You just forgot the map. And Einstein remembered it, not because someone gave it to him, but because he asked the questions that tore down the walls and exposed the divine structure underneath. And you must ask those questions too, not because you doubt, but because you desire. And desire is sacred when it is shaped. And most people fear their desire, but Einstein honored his and allowed it to shape the shape of his days, and the rhythm of his thoughts, and the language of his imagination. And now, the world calls it genius. But genius is not talent, it is trust. Trusting the structure beneath the surface, and building from it, no matter how slow, no matter how silent. And that structure will speak to you once you become still enough to receive it, and strong enough to shape it. And when you shape it, your life becomes alignment in motion, not struggle, not randomness, not chaos, but design. And you stop asking, what do I need? And start declaring, what do I want to build? And that Question changes everything because it makes you responsible for your resonance. And when your resonance rises, your reality rearranges. And Einstein knew this and lived this, and now so can you. Go get it. What if every limitation you feel is just a line drawn by your old thoughts? And what if Albert Einstein didn't erase those lines, but curved them until they opened into new dimensions? Because he understood that thought is not flat, it is fluid, and reality bends for the one who shapes it with precision, not panic, with rhythm, not reaction. And most people don't shape their mind, they survive it. They let random beliefs stack like broken bricks until they're trapped inside structures they never meant to build. But Einstein knew he was always building, and every question was a hammer, and every thought was a stone. And the architecture of genius wasn't in answers, but in alignment. Because aligned thoughts build cathedrals, and misaligned ones build prisons. And Einstein refused the mental prison. He stepped outside of accepted truth and into sacred design. And he didn't ask what is real. He asked what is possible when reality is shaped from within. And the sacred answered, not in words, but in waves, in visions, in geometric frequencies, too precise for language, but too loud for silence. And most people drown in silence because they never learned to listen with structure. But Einstein listened like a scientist and a mystic all at once, because he knew truth is not just discovered, it is decoded. And to decode something, you must first sit with it, not rush it. And most people rush their mind like a to-do list. But Einstein treated his mind like a sacred temple where thoughts were not tasks, but textures, frequencies, and fractals of the infinite, waiting to be formed. And he didn't rush formation, he revered it. And reverence is the lost art of genius, the ability to wait without wasting. And Einstein waited long enough for the architecture to emerge, and when it did, he shaped it with care and clarity and conviction. And now the world calls it science, but he knew it was spirit, structured into math. And math was not cold to him, it was divine order, and the divine always leaves clues, not in chaos, but in code. And that code lives in you too, not just in what you know, but in how you build. And you are building right now. Every emotion, every reaction, every conversation, every pattern is a beam or a brick, and the shape you're building will either set you free or trap you in repetition. And Einstein didn't just break the old shape, he bent it into new space. And he bent it with curiosity, with courage, with questions that scared most, but set him free. And now it's your time, not to copy the past, but to curve it, to bend the narrative until it matches your deepest alignment. And alignment doesn't mean perfect thought. It means patterned presence, a way of showing up that turns your chaos into cadence, and cadence becomes clarity, and clarity becomes clarity. Power and power becomes peace, and peace is not the absence of problems, it is the presence of precision. And Einstein lived in precision, and Einstein didn't repeat results, he repeated rituals, and those rituals became rhythm, and rhythm built resonance. And resonance shaped the reality we now live in. And you're doing the same, even if you don't see it yet. Because energy doesn't lie, it layers. And every time you return to stillness, you add another layer of alignment. And alignment multiplies over time, until suddenly, your reality reshapes to reflect the temple within. And Einstein didn't wait for change, he structured it. And now it's your turn to structure the unseen and sculpt the invisible, not with force, but with form. Because you are not here to hustle, You are here to harmonize with what's already sacred inside you. And that harmony doesn't come from speed, but from structure. And when the structure is sacred, the outcome is unstoppable. Go get it. What if everything you seek is already shaped within you? And what if Albert Einstein's real breakthrough wasn't in the numbers, but in the noticing, the sacred noticing of how reality breathes beneath the surface of thought, how geometry reveals itself in silence, how the smallest idea can echo through time if shaped with intention. And most people never echo because they never align. They never align because they never build. And they never build because they were told thinking is just knowing. But Einstein proved thinking is sculpting. And his thoughts were not scattered. They were sacred blueprints, laid with care and clarity. And most people want wisdom, but still build with worn-out wood, still think with broken beams, still frame their future with fear. But Einstein replaced fear with form, and that form became the foundation of freedom. And freedom is not found, it is forged. And he forged his freedom, thought by thought, breath by breath, not by escaping chaos, but by giving chaos a structure. And that structure was always sacred because it bent around. Truth and held space for vision, and every vision you've buried is still alive. It just needs framework. And every time Einstein felt confusion, he didn't panic, he paused, because sacred builders don't rush, they resonate. And he waited until resonance arrived, and then he built with it. And now his name is carved in time, not because he chased fame, but because he framed light. And you are here to frame light too. The light inside you, the spark that's been ignored, the structure waiting to rise. And Einstein's legacy is not a lesson in science. It's a manual for inner symmetry, pattern of mental mastery, a guide to geometric genius. And you don't need to be him to build like him. You need to decide that your thoughts will no longer be casual. They will be cathedral, no longer reactive, but reflective, no longer copied, but crafted, because every day you are building, and the structure will either liberate or limit. And Einstein knew this, and he built accordingly, and that build became destiny. And destiny is not written, it is welded. Welded from your rituals, from your reflections, from your sacred moments of silence, where shape meets spirit. And Einstein built those moments into monuments. And now it's your turn to take the invisible and incarnate it, to take the idea and give it infrastructure, to take the whisper and give it weight. And when you do, the universe begins to reflect your inner symmetry. And that reflection is reality, restructured. And Einstein did this, not once, but daily. Because building is not an act. It is a way of thinking, a way of listening, a way of living. And most people live in borrowed blueprints. But the sacred design is only revealed to those who dare to draw their own. And Einstein drew his own, not in rebellion, but in reverence. And reverence is what makes construction sacred. And sacred is what makes your life unshakable. And now the time has come for you not to remember him, but to reconstruct you. To take everything you've learned and layer it into design. To take everything you feared and turn it into foundation. To take every sacred spark and place it into position. And from that position, rise not with pressure, but with precision. And precision will make you magnetic. And magnetism will move the world. And Einstein didn't push the world, he pulled truth through it. And you are here to do the same. Not as a copy of greatness, but as a constructor of your own cosmic cathedral. So build now in silence, in beauty, in boldness, because thought is a temple, and the architect has always been you. Go get it. What if the greatest invention of Albert Einstein was not a theory, but a rhythm? A rhythm of being, a rhythm of building, a rhythm of bending perception around purpose. What if the shape of your success was never meant to come from pressure, but from precision, from the art of sacred sequencing, from arranging your days like a cosmic equation where intention becomes gravity and alignment becomes orbit? And most people live scattered, not because they're weak, but because they were never shown how to synchronize their soul. And Einstein synchronized everything: sleep, his silence, his questions, his curiosity. He didn't force breakthroughs, he framed them. He didn't chase clarity, he constructed it, thought by thought, hour by hour, not with motivation, but with mental engineering. And this is the truth most never hear, that genius is not talent, it's tempo. And Einstein had tempo in his thinking, in his breathing, in his seeing. He moved through ideas like a conductor guiding light, and every mental note had weight and wonder. And if a thought was out of tune, he removed it, because he understood that every mental misalignment becomes a distortion in design. And distortion in design creates collapse. And most people collapse, not from failure, but from faulty frequency. Their inner sound no longer matching their outer system. But Einstein didn't allow that dissonance. He adjusted daily. He refined relentlessly. And in his refinement, he became resonance. And that resonance became revelation. And revelation became reality. Not accidental, but intentional. And you must live intentional too, because if you don't, your life will echo patterns that don't belong to you. And every sacred soul must one day silence the inherited sound and choose a new song. And that song begins with awareness. And awareness is not observation, it is orchestration. It is tuning the unseen into shape, and Einstein tuned his inner world like an instrument. Every formula was a vibration. Every symbol was a chord. Every theory was a melody played in the key of creation. And he didn't learn this from books. He remembered it from silence. And in silence, he met structure. And in structure, he found the sacred. And the sacred doesn't speak in sentences. It speaks in symmetry. And most people fear symmetry because symmetry demands surrender. You cannot be random and aligned at the same time. You must choose. And Einstein chose alignment every single day. And that alignment became a law unto itself. It pulled understanding into orbit. It pulled solutions from the ether, whose thoughts are so structured, they bend reality around them, whose words carry the weight of architecture, not argument, whose silence is not absence, but design in formation. And this is how sacred minds move, not by pushing, but by pulling presence into form. And presence is the foundation of all power. And Einstein didn't have presence because he was famous. He had presence because he designed himself into a vessel for vision. And that design began the moment he stopped imitating others and started innovating from within. And most people spend their whole lives mimicking minds they don't understand. But you are here to break that pattern, not by rebellion, but by reconstruction. To rebuild the framework of thought from the inside out, to stop thinking in lines and start thinking in layers. Because thought is not a sentence, it is a product. Structure, and that structure must be refined and refined and refined again until it shines without sound. And that is what Einstein did. He made light visible through mental shape. And mental shape is the ultimate architecture, because it cannot be touched, yet it touches everything. It bends time. It bends space. It bends belief into becoming. And belief is not a feeling. Belief is a form. And when that form is fractured, your life will follow. And when that form is whole, your future becomes holy. And Einstein lived in that holiness. Not in religion, but in ritualized genius. And genius is a ritual, a way of treating each thought like a sacred piece of something eternal, a way of sitting with mystery long enough that it becomes map, a way of breathing so still that the universe speaks back, and when it speaks, you don't interrupt, you interpret, and interpretation becomes translation, and translation becomes transmission, and transmission becomes transformation. And that transformation is what you're here for, not to consume, but to construct. And that construction is not glamorous. It is grounded, and that grounding is what makes your greatness real. And most people want elevation, but avoid excavation. But Einstein excavated every fear, every doubt, every shadow, and turned them into structure. And the structure held him while the world tried to define him. And the sacred will hold you too if you build for it. Not with fantasy, but with form. And this is your permission to stop performing and start patterning. To pattern your life around light, and your mind around meaning, and your breath around the sacred. To wake each day not asking what's next, but asking, what will I build today with the light I carry? And that question will unlock everything, because you are not here to survive. You are here to sculpt eternity with thought. Go get it. What if the secret to becoming extraordinary is not in gaining more knowledge, but in removing what no longer resonates? What if Albert Einstein's true brilliance came not from knowing everything, but from unlearning what wasn't aligned? Because alignment is not addition, it's extraction, it's subtraction of the scattered until only the sacred remains. And this is the truth that no textbook teaches, that your greatest power is in your purity, the purity of thought, the purity of vision, the purity of love, inner structure, because genius does not come from force, it comes from form, and form must be refined. And most people are distracted, not because they lack focus, but because they've built no frame for their focus. And Einstein built frames, frames of time, frames of thought, frames of solitude, where only the highest ideas could live. Because he knew that without sacred frames, the mind becomes a mirror for madness. And he refused to reflect the chaos of the world. He chose to reflect the clarity of the cosmos. And the cosmos did not speak to him in language. It spoke to him in pattern, in wave, in symmetry, and silence. And he listened until listening became understanding, and understanding became translation, and translation became structure. And that structure turned his mind into a vessel, and that vessel carried light, and that light shaped time. And you must become a vessel too, not by accident, but by architecture. And that architecture begins with intention, not just to create, but to consecrate your thoughts, to make your ideas worthy of the future you were born to build. And most people think success is scale, but Einstein knew success is structure, because without structure, growth collapses. And without inner design, outer destiny dissolves, and he designed himself from the inside out, not with habits, but with harmony. And harmony is not productivity, it is purity. And purity happens when you release what no longer aligns. And most people are exhausted because they're carrying what was never meant to be built. And you must drop what's not sacred to build what is eternal. And this is the lesson most miss, that evolution begins with elimination. And Einstein eliminated distraction, not with discipline, but with devotion. He was devoted to his mind as a temple, not a slave, tool, and he treated each thought as sacred ground, not a commodity to trade. And that reverence shaped his results. And that reverence must shape you too, because the sacred does not respond to speed. It responds to stillness. And in stillness, the shape of truth begins to form, not loudly, but geometrically. And the geometry of genius is stillness multiplied by structure, and structure multiplied by spirit, and spirit multiplied by silence. And most people never multiply because they never subtract. And you must subtract to expand. Because expansion is not size, it's symmetry. And symmetry is the only structure that carries energy without distortion. And Einstein lived without distortion because he lived with devotion. And that devotion gave birth to dimensional thought. And dimensional thought is not linear. It's layered. It bends time. It bends fear. It bends limitations until they are loops, not walls. And you must bend your loops. Limits too, not with brute force, but with sacred shape. And sacred shape comes from inner sequencing, from organizing your thoughts into architecture, from turning chaos into code, and code into clarity, and clarity into construction. And that's what your life must become, a construction site of consciousness, where every idea is weighed, not for how loud it sounds, but how aligned it feels. And Einstein lived in alignment, not because he sought perfection, but because he sculpted precision. And precision is the only language the universe responds to, because it is pure. And when your thoughts become pure, they become powerful. And when they become powerful, they become portals. And portals don't just open, they transform. And transformation doesn't begin with change, it begins with choice. And you must choose now what you will no longer carry, what beliefs no longer serve, what patterns no longer elevate. And when you let go of what fragments you, you will rise into what forms you. And formation is not a moment, it is a movement. And Einstein moved in patterns most couldn't see, and spoke in frequencies most couldn't hear, because he didn't wait for genius. He wove it, thought by thought, loop by loop, shape by shape, until the invisible became inevitable. And now the world calls it genius, but you must call it what it really was, geometry of the sacred self. And that geometry lives in you too. If you dare to design from within, go get it. What if the most powerful structure you will ever build is not made of stone or steel, but of stillness? What if Albert Einstein didn't change the world because of what he knew, but because of how he sat with the unknown? Because most people run from mystery, but Einstein made mystery his mentor, and when the world rushed to conclusions, he returned to the center of his own mind and asked better questions. And that is the foundation of every sacred structure. The quality of your question determines the shape of your destiny. And Einstein's questions were not ordinary. They were portals disguised as wonder. They were spiral doors into unseen patterns, into sacred geometry encoded in silence. And he wasn't looking for answers. He was constructing access. And access doesn't come from speed. It comes from sacred sequencing of thought, built upon thought, silence nested within silence, until structure begins to hum. And that hum is not noise, it is frequency. And frequency is what makes the formless visible. And you were born to build frequency, not just routines, but rituals of resonance that unlock reality from the inside out. And most people build nothing. They repeat everything. And repetition without revelation is the waste. Death of brilliance. And Einstein avoided that death by designing his day like a divine algorithm. Each moment calibrated, each thought curated. And he didn't become a genius by memorizing equations. He became a genius by mapping energy. And energy does not obey logic. It obeys architecture. And your thoughts must be built like temples, not tossed like dice. Because every casual thought is a collapsed pillar, and every sacred thought is a structura, beam holding up the future, and most people's futures collapse, because their minds are constructed like houses of sand. But Einstein built his mind like a pyramid, unshakable, geometric, and eternal. And the pyramid was not a coincidence. It was a principle, a design choice. And you must make design choices too, because design is not decoration, it is destiny. And your destiny is not a matter of what happens. It is the result of what you hold sacred enough to shape. And shaping doesn't start with motion, it starts with meaning. And Einstein shaped meaning into math, and math into model, and model into momentum. And momentum is not luck. It is the reward of long obedience to the inner law of structure. And the inner law is simple. What is repeated with reverence becomes reality. And Einstein repeated curiosity, repeated silence, repeated solitude, repeated sacred questions. And those repetitions built resonance, and resonance made him timeless. You must build repetition too, not of noise, but of neural architecture, repeated thoughts that reinforce the cathedral you're constructing inside. Because thought is the tool of the sacred builder, and if you misuse it, you create ruin. And if you master it, you create revolution. And Einstein was a revolutionary, not with rebellion, but with rituals of structure. And now you must become one too, by reconstructing your identity around shape, around symmetry, around sequencing, by choosing to live in alignment with the blueprint of the infinite, not the broken copies of culture, because culture will sell you speed, but structure will give you stillness. And stillness is where clarity whispers, and where whispers become waves, and waves become worlds. And Einstein didn't just discover new worlds, he designed the doors to them. And you're holding the same blueprint in your breath, in your bones, in your belief. And belief must be built, not just felt, because feelings change, but foundations remain. And foundation is what separates thought from truth. And most people confuse the two, but Einstein didn't. He built truth by aligning thought to form, and form to function, and function to future. And that is why his ideas still live, because he didn't just think, he throned thought into eternity. And you must do the same, by sitting still long enough to see what's been trying to shape you all along. And when you see it, don't just stare, start shaping, because the sacred does not wait for perfection. It waits for presence. And once presence arrives, it pours itself into form, and that form becomes future, and that future becomes freedom. Go get it. What if the most powerful mind is not the one that thinks the most, but the one that listens the deepest? What if Albert Einstein's brilliance was not in his conclusions, but in his capacity to dwell inside a question? And not just any question, but the right question, the kind that doesn't end with dot, an answer, but opens into a new dimension, Because some questions are not puzzles to solve, but portals to step through. And Einstein stepped through them daily, not with ego, but with reverence, because he understood that reality does not open for those who demand it. It opens for those who design the inner world to receive it. And most people don't receive anything new because they've built no room for it. Their thoughts are cluttered with conditions, with comparisons, with cages made of beliefs they never questioned. But Einstein questioned everything, not to rebel, but to reconstruct, because genius is not resistance, it's reformation. And reformation begins in silence, in solitude, in the sacred decision to sit with what doesn't make sense until a new structure appears. And Einstein didn't panic in the unknown. He prepared for it. He made it his playground. And your power begins the same way, not when you answer fast, but when you breathe long enough to hear what's beneath the noise and beneath every pattern is a design. And when you find that design, you no longer guess. You generate, you create with confidence, not from control, but from clarity. And clarity is not found, it is forged. It is shaped inside the furnace of focus. And Einstein's focus was not perfect, it was patterned. And that pattern gave rise to rhythm, and rhythm gave rise to resonance, and resonance gave rise to revelation. And that revelation became reality, reformulated. And most people want revelation without rhythm. But rhythm is the bridge. Rhythm is the shape that holds the sacred. And without shape, thought collapses, and Einstein never let his thoughts collapse. He concentrated them like light through a lens until they burned through the limits of logic. And what emerged wasn't just knowledge, it was knowing, deep cellular knowing that bypassed books and went straight into blueprint. And that blueprint was built in his mind, day by day, not as a product, but as a portal. And every portal he created made him more precise. And precision is the real power. Not speed, not strength, not shouting, but sacred precision. The kind that slices through illusion like light through fog. And you have that same light in you, but it must be shaped because raw energy is not power. Refined energy is. And refinement begins when you stop reacting and start resonating. And resonance requires reflection. And reflection is a sacred act, not a soft one. Because to reflect honestly is to reconstruct deeply. And most don't want that reconstruction because it demands surrender. But Einstein surrendered, not to weakness, but to wisdom. And in that wisdom, he found the geometry of greatness, not in glory, but in grit, in returning to the blueprint again and again until the vision became visible. And now you must return to yours, because your vision didn't disappear, it just dissolved into noise. And now is the time to clear the static and rebuild the signal to align your frequency with form, and your thoughts with foundation, and your presence with precision. And from that place, build not wildly, but wisely, not loudly, but luminously. Because the most powerful builders of destiny are not the ones who scream the loudest, but the ones who structure silence into substance. And Einstein did that with every equation, with every conversation, with every breath. And that breath still echoes, not because it was louder, but because it was aligned, and alignment echoes through time. And now the next echo is yours. Go get it. What if the greatest leap forward doesn't come from learning something new, but from remembering something ancient, something eternal that lives inside you, something sacred that Albert Einstein did not invent, but intuitively aligned with. Because there are truths so deep, they don't belong to history, they belong to frequency. And he didn't just discover equations, he tuned into resonance. And resonance is more than harmony. It is identity made audible. It is your soul echoing its original design. And most people can't hear that echo because their mind is too loud, too layered with limitation, too tangled in time. But Einstein untangled himself by stepping into stillness, not as a pause, but as a portal. Because stillness is not the absence of motion, it is the alignment of movement. And every breath Einstein took was part of a sacred rhythm, not rushed, not random, but ritualized. And in that ritual, the mind softens and the heart sharpens, and the soul begins to whisper, not in noise, but in numbers, in shapes, in silent songs that carry sacred instruction. And he listened to that instruction and built with it. And that's what genius really is. It's not speed or IQ or grades. It's geometry embodied. It's knowing that thought is not just thought, it's scaffolding. It's spiritual architecture. And if your inner scaffolding is fractured, your whole world will feel unstable. But Einstein dealt inwardly before he ever revealed outwardly. And most people try to shine without shape. And shine without shape burns out. But shine with structure builds legacy. And his legacy is not light, it's leverage. The ability to move the immovable with the smallest shift. The ability to bend reality by bending the inner beam of attention. And attention is the most sacred resource, not because it's rare, but because it's the root of construction. Where your attention lives, your reality follows. And Einstein placed his attention like an architect with blueprints, not randomly, but reverently. And that reverence is what you must reclaim, not for someone else's truth, but for the sacred structure already waiting to rise within you. And structure does not rise with emotion. It rises with precision. And precision is born from repetition. And repetition is not weakness, it's wiring. And every day you repeat a thought, you strengthen the frame around it. And most people are building frames around fear. Reinforcing limits with their language, repeating patterns with no blueprint. But Einstein repeated truth with rhythm until it rewired his perception. And that perception built portal. And that shape is made from silence, from structure, from surrender. And most don't surrender because they think surrender is loss. But surrender is not losing. It is allowing the deeper design to emerge. Allowing the truth to shape you instead of you shaping over your truth. And Einstein allowed, and in that allowing came acceleration, but not the kind you see. It's the kind that reshapes you from the inside out, the kind that doesn't just teach, but transforms. And when transformation begins, construction becomes natural, and you begin to build with breath, with presence, with purpose, and every moment becomes material. Every word becomes weight. Every thought becomes a tool, not for escaping, but for etching destiny into time. And that is what Einstein did, and that is what you are called to do. To etch your essence into the structure of your life, not through noise, but through sacred design. And discipline is not punishment, it is permission. Permission to keep building even when no one sees it, because the sacred always starts unseen. And Einstein respected the unseen so much that it began to reveal itself to him. And now the unseen is asking you, will you shape it or ignore it? Will you structure your spirit or chase shadows? Because you cannot do both. And your time is now to return to the blueprint beneath the chaos, to to step into the geometry of your divine design, to listen to the inner echo calling you back to coherence. And when you return, you don't return as the same, you return as the architect of what's next. Go get it. What if the reason Albert Einstein could see beyond space and time was because he first learned to see within himself? What if his real discovery was not E equals mc squared, but the realization that thought is a force and form is the amplifier that your inner architecture either compresses your genius or sets it free? And most people live trapped, not because of the world, but because of their unstructured minds. Thoughts floating unanchored, dreams scattered across days. But Einstein's thoughts were sequenced, they were shaped, they were sacred. And that shaping didn't come from school. It came from stillness, from solitude, from the silence between the questions. Where most people panic, he planted patterns. Where most give up, he listened deeper. And he didn't listen for answers. He listened for alignment. Because when your inner world aligns with universal rhythm, reality begins to fold around your focus. And his focus wasn't frantic, it was fluid. Not forced, but framed, and in that framing came freedom. Because when your mind is a map, you never get lost. And Einstein mapped his thoughts like sacred geometry. Every concept, a point. Every point, a pathway. Every pathway, a portal. And he walked those mental portals until they became physical principles. Because energy responds to the one who respects it. And Einstein respected everything. Not just the seen, but the unseen. Not just the visible, but the void. And most people fear the void, but Einstein honored it. Because he knew void is not emptiness, it is potential waiting for design. And he designed with discipline, not of the body, but of the brain. And that discipline created direction. And direction created dimensional perception, the ability to think in layers and live in patterns that create power, not pressure. And you must learn to live that way too, not to hustle harder, but to sequence smarter. Because every breakthrough is a point. Shape before it is a sentence, and every idea must find its frame, or it collapses under the weight of possibility. And Einstein built frames for ideas that changed the world. And the only difference between him and the millions who didn't was that he was willing to sit inside a question until it revealed its structure. And you must sit too, not in frustration, but in formation, because you are forming something far bigger than goals. You are forming the geometry of your genius. And genius doesn't arrive, it emerges through structure. And most people don't structure anything. They hope, they wish, they wait. But hope without shape is heartbreak waiting to happen. And Einstein didn't wait. He wove reality from rhythm. And rhythm is not routine. It is sacred synchronization with the unseen laws that build worlds. And those laws are not hidden. They are simply unheard by those moving too fast. And you must slow down, not to pause, but to pursue. Instruction becomes design, and design becomes destiny. And your destiny isn't something waiting, it's something wiring. And every belief, every reaction, every inner narrative is a wire connecting or disconnecting you from the life you're meant to live. And Einstein rewired everything from the inside out, not once, but daily. And that daily devotion became divine design. And divine design is not for the chosen, it's for the constructors, The ones who treat thought like a tool, not a toy. The ones who treat time like a template, not a trap. And he treated time with reverence. He bent it with thought, not because he wanted to escape it, but because he knew time will bow to structure, and your life will too. Once you decide you're done building randomly, and you're ready to rise geometrically, because geometry is not math, it is meaning made visible. And your life must become visible now, not for others, but for the sacred echo of who you were always meant to be. And that echo begins with shape, not with speed, not with shouting, but with sacred inner scaffolding that cannot collapse because it is built from coherence. And you must now return to coherence, to build not a moment of motivation, but a movement of momentum. Because momentum is not motion, it is pattern multiplied by presence. And presence is not stillness, it is sovereignty. And Einstein was sovereign because his mind was his own. And now yours must become yours too. Go get it. What if the difference between genius and mediocrity is not in thinking more, but in thinking with form? What if Albert Einstein didn't become a genius because he was smarter, but because he structured his soul before he structured his sentences? What if the mind is not a container for knowledge, but a temple for patterns, and every belief is a beam, every thought a stone, every habit a brick? And most people live in crumbling temples because they build without blueprints. But Einstein studied the unseen architecture of reality and then modeled his inner architecture after it, not because he needed control, but because he needed coherence. And coherence is the foundation of all creation, not just clarity, but structural clarity. And that structure made his mind magnetic, not messy, magnetic to answers, magnetic to symbols, magnetic to synchronicities. Because when the mind is structured, the universe sends signals. And those signals aren't loud, they're layered, they're encoded, they're sacred. And most people miss them because they only listen with logic. But Einstein listened with silence, with surrender, with stillness. He treated his thoughts like sacred guests, not mental clutter. And in that reverence came revelation. And in that revelation came resonance. And resonance is the beginning of real transformation. Because when you resonate, you don't chase truth, you receive it. And receiving requires design. The design of discipline, the design of thought, the design of daily becoming. And most people want destiny without design. But destiny without design is disaster. And Einstein never waited for destiny. He wove it like a tapestry, threading thought into thought until a pattern emerged. And the pattern was precise. And that precision became prophecy. Because once you build your thoughts with accuracy, they attract aligned futures. And aligned futures don't require effort. They require entry. And you enter through pattern, through patience, through presence. And most people never enter because they're knocking on the wrong doors, asking the wrong questions, building with broken tools. But Einstein replaced his tools with truth. He built a mental workshop of sacred instruments, where silence was the hammer and vision the chisel, and every idea a sculpture in progress. And you must become a sculptor too, not of clay, but of consciousness, carving away the false, shaping the sacred, building a thought temple that can carry the weight of your calling. And most people collapse under calling because they never built capacity. And capacity is not given. Grown through repetition, grown through friction. grown through facing the unknown and refining it into clarity. And Einstein refined until his very being was a formula. And that formula wasn't complex. It was coherent. And coherence bends reality, because the universe ends. Universe, your days in sacred symmetry. And from that symmetry will rise a life that doesn't collapse under chaos, because it was coded for coherence from the inside out. And the inside must always be built first, because the outside will eventually reflect whatever pattern you hold. And if your pattern is disordered, your destiny will be too. But if your pattern is precise, your path becomes unstoppable. And that is the pattern Einstein left us. Not in the math, but in the mindset. Not in the formula, but in the frequency of focus that says, I will not build randomly. I will build ritually. Go get it. What if Albert Einstein's most profound discovery wasn't a formula or a theory, but the realization that the universe speaks in patterns, and the only way to understand it is to become a pattern yourself? What if greatness isn't found in doing more, but in becoming more coherent? Because coherence is not order, it is energetic precision. It is when every thought, every word, every intention carries the same frequency, and that frequency becomes a force. And that force doesn't push, it pulls it. Pulls clarity, it pulls momentum, it pulls manifestation. And that's what Einstein mastered. He didn't push for genius. He pulled it into his orbit by organizing his inner world so perfectly. The outer world had no choice but to respond. And most people try to push through resistance without realizing that resistance is not something to fight. It's something to decode. Because every block is a blueprint in disguise. And Einstein didn't fear blocks. He listened to them. He listened with patience. He listened with pattern. He listened with purpose. And that listening became alignment. And alignment is the birthplace of all revelation. Because when you align, you don't chase, you attract. And when you attract from alignment, you no longer seek permission to create. Because creation itself starts asking for you. And most people never reach this, because they never stop performing long enough to become patterned people. And a patterned person is someone who lives with such internal order that their very presence becomes architecture. And Einstein was architecture in motion. He moved like a fractal of thought unfolding. He walked with invisible math inside his mind. He breathed equations. He blinked in rhythm. He didn't speak often, but when he did, it landed like a law, because the truth carries weight when it is carried by structure. And your words must become around you, and that design begins with the decision to stop chasing novelty and start building necessity. And necessity is the mother of mastery. When you must rise, you refine. When you must speak, you simplify. When you must lead, you listen. And Einstein listened more than he spoke, not because he lacked answers, but because he respected the sacred space of thought. And sacred space is rare today, because we live in mental clutter. And mental clutter kills coherence. And without coherence, you collapse. And that's why structure is not optional. It's essential. And your structure is what protects your signal. And your signal is what builds your reality. And if your reality feels stuck, maybe it's not fate. Maybe it's frequency misaligned. And alignment is to genius, and genius is not a gift. It is a grid, a system of internal refinement, a series of sacred repetitions that calibrate you to clarity. And that clarity becomes gravity, and gravity bends time. And you must bend time too, not with pressure, but with pattern. Because time is not your enemy, it's your material. And how you shape it becomes the sculpture of your destiny. And destiny is not something you find, it's something you form from the formless. And that formation happens every time you return to your center and ask, what is my structure? And what is my signal? And what will I now sculpt from both? And you don't need permission to begin. You just need presence. And presence is power multiplied by pattern. And when pattern meets power, you become the architect of alignment. And when you align your mind, you bend your moments. And when you bend your moments, you don't follow history, you create it. Go get it. What if Albert Einstein's genius wasn't lightning, it was architecture? What if his insights weren't accidents, but inevitable results of internal design? Because genius isn't gifted, it's geometric. It unfolds from pattern and purpose. And most people are trying to reach destiny without first building dimensional structure inside. And Einstein didn't stumble into brilliance. He shaped himself into a living equation. And that equation was not built from memory. It was built from momentum. Not rushed, but recursive. Not frantic, but fractal. And a fractal is a pattern that repeats at every scale. And that's how he thought, in patterns that echoed from the smallest thoughts to the grandest theories. And most people never reach coherence because they live in mental noise, not mental design. They react to reality instead of constructing it from consciousness. But Einstein knew that every thought was a template, and every template was either sacred or sloppy. And he chose sacred. And sacred isn't about being. Precise and precision is the gatekeeper of power, because when your thought becomes sharp enough, it cuts through time. And when your focus becomes clear enough, it reconstructs your frequency. And that frequency becomes form. And form becomes future. And future is not random, it's recursive. It mirrors the shape of your mind. And if your mind is scattered, your path will split. And if your mind is shaped, your life will stack. And stacking is how energy ascends. Energy does not rise by explosion. It rises by order. And order is not rigidity, it's rhythm. And rhythm is not repetition, it's resonance, aligned with the divine. And that alignment turns chaos into clarity. It turns complexity into code. And Einstein cracked codes, not because he forced them, but because he felt their pattern before he proved their form. And you must learn to feel your pattern too, not emotionally, but energetically. The subtle signal of what's yours, what's sacred, what's true. And when you follow that signal, it leads you to your center. And your center is the control room of reality. And most people abandon their center in favor of speed. But speed without center is collapse. And Einstein wasn't fast. He was foundational. And foundations don't fall. They frame the infinite. And he framed his mind with discipline, with vision, with sacred solitude. And in that solitude came structure. And in that structure came sequences. And in those sequences emerged the sacred science of self. And now, you must sequence yourself into shape too. Because your greatness isn't waiting, it's wiring. And your wiring must be healed. Refined not randomly, but ritually. And ritual is the doorway to rhythm. And rhythm is the blueprint of becoming. And when you become the blueprint, instead of chasing one, you stop reacting to problems and start receiving possibilities. And possibilities don't just happen. They appear in spaces you've structured to receive them. And most don't receive because their space is chaos. Why you must become a container for clarity, a vessel for vision, a temple of sacred thoughts. And that temple is built thought by thought, belief by belief, structure by structure, until your entire being becomes a bridge between ideas and incarnation. And that bridge will carry others too, because true genius is not personal, it's pattern shared. And when you build the right pattern, you don't just rise alone, you lift generations. And Einstein's mind did that, not because he chased legacy, but because he honored alignment. And now it's your time to align your breath with your blueprint, your thoughts with your truth, your focus with your future. Because the future doesn't arrive, it emerges, and it will emerge through you, only if you build the shape strong enough to receive it. Go get it. What if Albert Einstein's final discovery wasn't written in ink, but etched in energy? What if his legacy isn't in what he solved, but in how he structured his soul? Because true power isn't in proving theories, it's in becoming one. And he didn't just write equations, he embodied them. His life was a formula of frequencies, a dance of thought and design. Most people think genius is born, but genius is built, slowly, silently, structurally. And Einstein's structure was not an accident. It was intentional architecture. Every question a blueprint, every silence a sacred site, every theory a temple, and he didn't just visit these temples, he became them. Because the real genius wasn't his intellect, it was his internal infrastructure. His commitment to coherence, his obsession with order, not external order, but the invisible symmetry that runs through all reality. And that symmetry only reveals itself to those who seek it, not with hunger, but with humility. And humility isn't weakness. It is the willingness to reshape everything you think you know. And Einstein reshaped himself over and over, not to conform to reality, but to construct it. And now you must do the same, because the final law is not gravity or relativity. It's responsibility, the sacred ability to respond to the signal within you, the design that only you can build, the frequency only you can hold. And holding that frequency is not ease, it is engineering. Engineering your thoughts, your habits, your time, your focus, until your very presence becomes a portal. And when your presence becomes a portal, the world bends not to your will, but to your wavelength. And most never reach this state because they fear the silence, they fear the solitude, they fear the sacred responsibility of designing themselves. But you were born to build. You were born to shape energy into experience, to mold time into momentum, to sculpt destiny from discipline. And discipline is not about restriction. It is about resonance, aligning so deeply that the universe sees itself in you and begins to echo your intention across dimensions. And that echo is the proof of alignment. Because aligned people don't chase, they call. They don't guess, they generate. They don't hope, they harmonize. And Einstein was harmony in human form. His thoughts didn't collide, they converged. And that convergence created cosmic coherence. And now you must converge your truth with your timeline, your breath with your blueprint, your identity with your intelligence. Because intelligence without identity is Scattered, an identity without intelligence, is stagnant. But when the two merge, you become a living equation of becoming. And that equation solves the world. Not through answers, but through architecture. Because the world doesn't need more ideas. It needs more individuals who are structured in soul. And structure is not style, it is scaffolding. The invisible beams that hold your being when the storm arrives. And the storm will come because greatness must be tested. But when the storm comes, you will not bend. You will resonate because resonance cannot be broken. It echoes through time, and your time is now. Not to be known, but to be named by the sacred as one who chose to build what others only talked about, to shape what others only dreamed, to walk where others waited, to become what others feared because others feared failure. But you feared never forming the full expression of what was hidden within you. And now, nothing is hidden, because you are revealed not by accident, but by alignment, emotion, but by evolution. And evolution is structure, stretched across timelines. And your timeline is infinite. Once your structure becomes eternal, and eternity doesn't belong to the dead, it belongs to the designed. And now, you are designed for something far beyond motivation. You are designed to become geometry in motion, purpose in form, destiny in flesh. And the story of Einstein was never about genius. It was about you. It was about reminder, a resonance, a sacred mirror calling you home, not to who you were, but to what you are becoming. Go get it.